Dr. Dawson?
Thank you.
How are you doing today?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I really enjoyed your lecture today. Really went from the nuts and bolts of TruDiagnostic and down to what we can look for in applications in the future. You went over some of the reasons why TruDiagnostic is the gold standard in methylation testing and age, sort of biologic age testing. Can you kind of review that and go over that for me again?
Sure, yeah. So what sets us apart really is the science. Like from the beginning, we've been a deep science company. So founded in 2020. In the last few years, we've published over 50 studies with Harvard, Duke, Yale, Karolinska, Johns Hopkins, like the biggest institutions in the world. And so we don't put out a test unless it's really been validated and produced and the science is clean and clear. We just, in the last couple of weeks, had our Harvard study about O-week age published in Nature Aging, the biggest aging journal in the world. We have licenses to dozens of clocks, of biological age clocks, that we only report on the ones that we think are the most scientifically backed and validated. So we really try to stick to the science. And we have our own CLIA-certified lab. None of the other epigenetic testing companies, they're all outsourcing that to other third parties, but that's very important to us to really be doing the science, building the science, partnering with the best in the world.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Data-driven and science-driven, that's really what gives it validity, especially when you've got a market where there's so many other biologic age testing companies that are coming out. It seems that if you don't have the data, you don't have anything to stand on, and you guys have that.
That's right. And the tests that we're putting out, they're not tests that we internally just developed ourselves and say, trust us.
Yeah.
These are big universities, respectable universities that produce this science that we then license and put out there. So we're not selling our tests, we're selling Harvard's tests, Duke's tests, Yale's tests.
The technology has changed over the years. There's been many generations of methylation tests. And, in the beginning, it was kind of a crude, blunt instrument, just giving us an age. Going along in the kind of development of the testing, were there certain moments where you all of a sudden realize that this is a much more applicable test? Those aha moments, so to speak. Yeah,
that's right. The first tests were really chronologic age tests. They were predicting your chronologic age, which is interesting, but it's not really helpful. Yeah. Like we know our chronologic age. You go to your license and figure out what your birthday is, what your chronological age is. The newer tests are really much more about biologic age. And how we define that is we care about aging because we care about morbidity and mortality, the diseases we're going to get and how long we're going to live. And age is the number one risk factor for those. So the biologic age tests are much better at predicting how long you're going to live, what disease you're going to get, and your chronologic age. So it's really those third generation tests that we use that are much more applicable and useful for individuals and making decisions on health.
Do you see, what population do you see utilizing this test more regularly? I mean, it's these age testing clocks are being adopted by this longevity community. Do you see a wider application? And if so, what areas do you see it going to first?
So I think anyone who wants to live longer and be healthier is the target audience. Anyone that measures biomarkers, which most of us do, you probably want the most predictive and most important biomarkers. And if we think aging is the number one risk factor, what gets measured gets managed. And so if you want to live longer and healthier, you should be measuring your biologic age and your pace of aging as well. We talk about biologic age, but my favorite test is actually the pace of aging test that Duke developed. I think that is the one that is really the most actionable because it responds so well to intervention. And you can try things. You can change your diet up from a vegan to an omnivore diet or a keto diet and see how it affects your pace of aging. You can try the hot new supplement or senolytics or IV stem cells or things like that and see how it affects your pace of aging. So that's my favorite one. Having a test that responds to interventions and you can customize your diet, supplements, lifestyle, and follow that. I think that is the one, in my opinion, that's the most actionable.
You've got the true age and the true health. When did that start getting adopted, and what was it that allowed you to really start getting granular with some of these conditions and systems?
For years, a common refrain is, okay, I can measure my biologic age or pace of aging, but what do I do about it? So some research that we did with Harvard, we identified that through epigenetics, we could get all of these biomarkers that had actually what to do. So when you get your pace of aging, your biologic age, if you also use the true health, that gives you about 100 biomarkers, so you can find specific things to do. So I gave the example of my chief of staff, who what she'll do is every quarter measure a pace of aging, then measure that true health, look at 100 biomarkers. And from those biomarkers, she'll change up her diet or something. That's what she's doing, and then retest. And over time, she slowly reduced her pace of aging down to 0.6. So she's aging at 60% of the normal rate. So the true health is what to do. The true age is how am I doing? And the true health is now what do I do to slow my aging even more?
That picture that you showed with all of the biomarkers that it tests and looks at to come up with the aging. I mean, you can call this a peptide conference. A lot of us have come here, with the idea and the love of using these type of molecules, peptides. When I think about the aging test and the health test, it makes me wonder, the challenge with peptides is what are we measuring? What are we looking at when we're starting these peptides? How is it affecting health? This looks like a fantastic tool to be able to actually test something that we don't even know we could be looking at to see the effects of certain peptides.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So as a clinician, when I was taking care of patients, frequently people would want to try things.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, let's look at the science. So we look at the science and, okay, it looks like it works. But when we say it works because the study says it works, what the study actually says is it works for 60% of people or 70% of people. I don't know if it's going to work for you.
Yeah.
So I really want a biomarker to be able to measure, is this working for you? And a lot of things will have that. If we want to change your diet and see how it affects your metabolic health, that's great. We can measure hemoglobin A1C and some other markers. We're trying to affect your cholesterol. We can measure that. But if it's globally a peptide that you're thinking is affecting your aging, I want a biomarker for that. So having the aging biomarker is important, pace of aging.
Yeah.
And then the true health, there's these 100 biomarkers. A lot of those are ones you can't get in a lab or West. It's new biomarkers so we can measure new things. So the interventions are great. But we really do need an objective marker so that we're doing something that 60% of people works for and say it works. But what if you're not 30%?
Yeah.
I want to know that sooner rather than later. And by doing the intervention testing, doing another intervention testing, and start stacking and see all the things that work for you to really optimize your health.
Yeah, you see a trend in layered treatments also. And I think that this is a great way to potentially validate. I mean, when patients feel better, that's always a good sign. Right. I think there's value in also having something additional that's hard data, that's in black and white, that shows the patient, you're feeling better, but look, these markers also improving. And with the true health, you have the biomarkers that are listed there too.
That's exactly right. And I always tell patients, the subjective part of how you're feeling is really important.
Yeah.
It's not everything, though. Like if I gave you meth or heroin, you're going to feel better. Or some cocaine, you're going to feel better.
Yeah.
But the objective marker that we measure later is probably not going to be great.
Yeah.
So I definitely want to know how you feel, but I want to know how you're going to do long term too. So I want the objective and the subjective.
I feel like with these large language models and like the ability to crunch large sums of data and these proteomics that are looking at so many different biomarkers, this helps to track what's being looked at better than we can and detect things that are really useful as markers for treatments that we think don't have markers.
Yeah, that is the future of diagnostics, a combination of AI and epigenetics.
Yeah.
The epigenetics, we can get so much incredibly rich data. Like I mentioned, potentially $100,000 worth of data for a few $100. You then introduce a new problem. You have so much data.
Yeah. How
do you make sense of it? Well, we're living in this time when large language models and AI are the perfect solution to that. So we're actually building that into our product. Very soon, our product is going to be built on top of the large language model. So you not only get all the data, but you can interact with it and tell what to do if you have all the data as well. It's very important to kind of merge these two.
What interval do you recommend for an average clinician to be using TruDiagnostic to follow these trends?
It really just depends on how intensely you want to optimize.
Yeah.
Some people will do it once a year. That's fine. Other people, like my chief of staff, who really got their pace of aging, does it once a quarter.
Yeah.
And so anywhere between that. I'd say once a month is too often, although that's approximately what I do. Things.
Yeah.
But once a quarter, twice a year, once a year, all those are reasonable. It just depends on how intense you want to do it, how many things you're changing.
Yeah.
Well, if you're changing frequently, you should measure it.
Is once a month too soon? Like, do we need a certain time frame to allow changes to become manifest phenotypically?
We do, usually a couple of months. So, for example, in the Stanford study, where they looked at the pace of aging, And they were crossing over people from a vegan to omnivore diet. That was a 2-month trial.
Okay.
And they did see a change. So we will see a change at 2 months. 1 month may be a little short. Again, I am a data nerd. I want as much data as I can, so I do it that frequently. But I'd say 2 months is probably the smallest interval I would recommend. And once a quarter every 3 months is really pretty robust.
Yeah. So where do you see TruDiagnostic going in the future? Is it wider panel of biomarkers, or is it diving deeper and more like granular into conditions to treat?
Yeah. So what I've come to believe is that what you can predict with epigenetics is limited by your imagination and the size of the data set. We have a goal by 2030, we have a vision to be able to diagnose over 90% of disease in the world, over 90% accuracy here. So we're going even into disease diagnostics. So we were just awarded 12th PLA code from the American Association for actually diagnosing disease with epigenetics.
Yeah.
And then we're also moving into predicting disease. Are you going to get something in the next 10 years? We have some really preliminary data that I'm a little hesitant to even talk about. We have a big cohort and data set that had a large number of dementia patients in it. And we were able from that to look at their blood samples prior to getting dementia and create a 10-year predictor of will you develop dementia in the next 10 years. And that's really the holy grail. Once we can start predicting to do something about it, we need to know what's going on. The best way is to affect the future is to be able to predict it and then do something about it.
Yeah.
So right now, biologic age, all these biomarkers. Next is going to be disease diagnostics and predicting disease as well. It's kind of a fast following.
Yeah. What you're doing at TruDiagnostic is very impressive. And what I also find interesting is, most entrepreneurs or business folk, people that are going from business to business, and they will tend to stay in the same business model. And this looks like a departure from what you did at Wild Health.
That's interesting. I see it as exactly the same thing. Because my vision has always been to optimize health.
Perfect. Yeah.
Live as long as they can, as healthy as they can. When I was at Wild Health, we were focusing on genomics, genetics.
Yeah, okay.
And I thought that was going to be where all the power is. It turns out genetics are only 20% of our health outcome. The other 80% are epigenetics. But when I started at Wild Health, we couldn't really measure epigenetics like we could now.
Got it.
And I still remember when TruDiagnostic first approached me with some study they were doing at Harvard, and I looked at it and I was blown away. I remember calling my co-founder of Wild Health and I said, I think we've been wasting our time in genomics. It's epigenetics. That's where and how we're going to be able to optimize people's health span and help them live longest and healthiest. So I see it as exactly the same. It's just the tools change and evolve, and we want to use the most cutting edge, best tool for whatever we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, it seems like this is an evolution of what you were doing in Wild Health.
Yeah, it's just the next step.
Yeah. Well, great. It's great to meet you. Great to talk to you.
Great to meet you.
Thanks, Doctor.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thanks.